Welcome to the Liberty Cast, where we do our best to trigger the American communists with facts and common sense.
Hey, what's up, y'all? Welcome to the Liberty Cast. I'm your host, Big E, and it's been a big news week this week, as usual. We have a lot to talk about. First and foremost, being the Mueller report and what that might mean, and then we'll talk about the American communists and some of the ridiculous ideas that they are putting forth, and then we'll talk about the shooting in Christchurch, New Zealand, and a few other topics if there's time. But let's go ahead and get started. So the special counsel, Bob Mueller, he finally wrapped up his investigation into collusion with Russia this week, and his report has been delivered to the Attorney General. The big news from that is that he is recommending no further indictments stemming from this investigation. Of course, that's fantastic news, but let's not get ahead of ourselves here. There's still a possibility that the reason he's not recommending any further indictments is the law that prohibits the indictment of a sitting president. Now, I doubt that that's going to happen, but it is still a possibility. And this investigation has spawned a number of other investigations that are still ongoing, and the leftists in Congress have vowed to keep looking until they find something. They're not just accepting Mueller's report on face value. So ridiculous. But they knew this was coming, and they tried to pivot to obstruction because they knew or had an idea that that the report wasn't going to go their way. But the fact that the investigation has concluded, the report has been delivered, that makes the obstruction claim implausible. Mueller finished his probe. He was never fired. So that kind of blows the whole obstruction narrative out of the water. Now, I haven't spent a whole lot of time with you guys talking about this because there are a number of people out there that have done and continue to do a fabulous job following this and breaking down this fraudulent investigation. And I say fraudulent because the foundation of the investigation was the Steele dossier. And if you've been paying attention, you know that the Steele dossier was used to obtain FISA warrants against Carter Page and others in the Trump orbit. But Carter Page's reputation is in tatters as a result of this. And Christopher Steele admitted recently that the dossier was compiled and verified using CNN's iReport, which is the equivalent basically of a dive bar bathroom wall or the comment section of a conspiracy theory blog. It's ridiculous. And iReport doesn't even exist anymore. They took it down. But not only has it been proven that, or has it been admitted to that the dossier was unverified, but it was politically motivated. It was paid for by Hillary Clinton and the DNC. So after 2 years, if there had been any evidence of collusion, we would have heard about it. The indictments that came down as a result of the investigation, they were all process crimes that likely never would have been discovered if not for this investigation. People pled guilty, they were convicted, whatever. But that had nothing to do with President Trump colluding with Russia. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the entire investigation and the resulting confessions and convictions are fruit of the poisonous tree. They should be tossed. I really hope that President Trump pardons some of these people or commutes their sentences. Because like I said, fruit of the poisonous tree should have never happened. But the probe's over. So now what? And like I mentioned earlier, there are a number of investigations still ongoing, most notably the one in the Southern District of New York, where there's still a possibility of indictment against President Trump for campaign finance violations. I'm not buying that one either. They tried that with Stormy Daniels, and we see where that went. But old shifty Adam Schiff and that moron Eric Swalwell, they're completely melting down over this. Listen to what Swalwell said on Real Time with Bill Maher yesterday.
If you have a TV or a Twitter account, you've already seen obstruction of justice. And so I think the team has seen that. But here's what's important, is that the public sees the report contemporaneously with the president. He should not be allowed to edit. He should not be allowed to restrict or sanitize. And Mueller has to come before Congress and tell us its veracity.
What is he talking about? How can you obstruct justice over Twitter? How can he haven't obstructed the investigation when he actually told Comey in the beginning to investigate whether or not anyone in his orbit engaged in any illegal activity? How could he have obstructed the investigation when he was never told that he was the subject of the investigation? How could he have obstructed the investigation when Andy McCabe, under oath in front of Congress, said that no effort was made to obstruct the investigation? Anyway, despite the fact that this is welcome news, this is going to be going on for the duration of the Trump presidency, whether that ends in 2020 or 2024. Until we actually see the report, though, there's really not a whole lot else to say. So we're just going to move on. The American communists on the left have some terrible ideas.
Terrible.
Thanks, Chuck. Yeah, just ridiculous. Open borders, giving illegals the right to vote, lowering the voting age to 16, stacking the Supreme Court, eliminating the Electoral College.
Well, my view is that every vote matters. And the way we can make that happen is that we can have national voting, and that means get rid of the Electoral College and everybody.
But are you seeing the pattern here? Every one of those terrible leftist ideas stems from the fact that they lost an election that they probably should have won, but since they didn't win, they want to change the rules. Open borders, giving illegal aliens the right to vote, ensures that those illegal aliens will vote Democrat because they're going to get free stuff. 16-year-olds, profoundly ignorant. Notice I didn't say stupid. Stupidity is a lot harder to cure than ignorance. And a 16-year-old's ignorance is often cured with age and education. I know some smart and very capable 16-year-olds. They shouldn't vote. I have every confidence that they'll grow into smart and capable conservatives. But right now, no. And much like everything else the left does, there's a logical fallacy in wanting 16-year-olds to vote. How can they be trusted to vote, but people 2 to 5 years older than that can't be trusted to buy a gun, even though they were old enough to fight and die for this country? There's some missing links from that logic chain. But the reasons why their ideas are terrible are legion and obvious. But one of their ideas that I want to focus on right now is the audio I played for you, which was Elizabeth Warren advocating for eliminating the Electoral College. But before I go any further, can we just eliminate the word democracy from any description of this country? We are a constitutional republic. A democracy, a straight democracy, is majority rule, mob rule. And the founders saw this coming, which is why they created the Electoral College. It mitigates against a tyrannical majority. A candidate needs 270 electoral votes to win the presidency. The 10 states with the most electors totals 258. Those states are California, Texas, New York, Florida, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Ohio, Georgia, North Carolina, and Michigan. And then when you throw in states like New Jersey, which has 14, Washington, which has 12, Virginia, which has 13, Massachusetts, which has 11, That still leaves 36 states plus the district. It doesn't take a math genius to realize that in a direct democracy, a candidate need only concentrate on a few densely populated states. Now, I'm not going to get into the swing state math and all that, but just look at the population centers in those states. New York City, Los Angeles, Houston and Austin. And don't even get me started on Austin. But Chicago, Atlanta. There's a website that breaks down the electors and the voting patterns of all these states. It's called 270towin.com. And let me just go through some of these states real quick. California has 55 electoral votes. They've voted Democrat since 1992. Texas has 38. They've voted Republican since 1980. Now it's getting closer every year. And if we're not careful, it could flip. And if it flips, who knows what could happen. Florida has 29. They've voted Republican in 2016. But in 96, 2008, and 2012, they voted Democrat. They're a true swing state, a battleground state. Then you have New York, which has 29 also. They voted Democrat since 1988. Pennsylvania has 20. They voted Republican in 2016, but between 1992 and 2012, Democrat. Illinois, also 20. They voted Democrat since 1992. Ohio, also 20. They voted Republican in 2016. But in 92, 96, 08, and 2012, they voted Democrat, another battleground state. Georgia, they've voted Republican reliably since 1996, but that also gets closer every year. And they have 16 electoral votes. North Carolina with 15, they voted Democrat in 2008, but they voted Republican between 1980 and 2004, and then in 2012 and 2016. That could be moving into swing state territory depending on how things go. Michigan, 16 electoral votes. They voted Democrat between 1992 and 2012. In 2016, they went the other way to Republican. New Jersey, Virginia, Massachusetts, and Washington all voted Democrat. Massachusetts, since 1988, never even close. Washington, not as decisive as Massachusetts, but also since 1988. Virginia, they started voting Democrat in 2008, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. New Jersey, they voted Democrat since 1992. But why do they want to eliminate the Electoral College? One argument is that the Electoral College has racist roots, which is silly, and I'll get back to that in a second. But another reason is the popular vote. Hillary won the popular vote, and therefore the Electoral College runs counter to the will of the people. Oh, we've just gone over why that's a myth. Because it's long been established that the left sees the government as the solution to all the country's problems, despite the fact that pretty much every problem we face as a country can be traced back to a government program or intervention. But if the government is a provider of sorts, then the popular vote is just a referendum on the one that promises to provide the most stuff. There's a great piece in The Federalist from last year by August Mayrat, and I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, where he expands on this quite a bit and talks about why people in metropolitan areas are more likely to outsource control of their lives as opposed to people in more rural areas who are used to providing for themselves. It's a fascinating piece, and I'll link to it on the website. But by advocating for the Electoral College to be eliminated, what the left is saying is that they couldn't care less about what anyone who disagrees with them or who doesn't want the free stuff that they promise thinks. People who don't live in metropolitan areas are rubes, don't know anything. We're not as enlightened as they are. We're not as virtuous as they are. And therefore, we need them to think for us. Need them to tell us how to spend our money, how to protect ourselves, how to live our lives. Eliminating the Electoral College will ensure that the most populous areas dominate elections. And the most populous areas are overwhelmingly liberal. And even Texas is inching that way. All the people fleeing hellholes like California and Massachusetts, and with all due apologies to my Boston peeps, but between the taxes and the infringement on the Second Amendment, it's a hellhole. Marjorie Decker, a representative from Massachusetts, actually said that owning guns is a privilege and not a right. So there's that. I am so glad that I don't live there anymore. But all the people fleeing places like that to Texas are doing their best to vote in the same stupid policies that made them want to leave those places in the first place. I don't even want to think about what would happen if Texas votes Democrat in the next election. But before I move on to the next topic, I said I'd get back to the Electoral College being racist. It's not. But one reason they try to push that narrative is that they claim that it gives more weight to rural areas with lower minority populations. But if you just think about that logically for a second, you realize that the racial makeup of the states doesn't matter. It's based on population. Not to mention the fact that slavery was abolished under Abraham Lincoln, who won the presidency with only 40% of the popular vote, thanks to the Electoral College. So that myth is busted. But it's related to another reason why they say that the Electoral College is racist, and that is the 3/5 compromise. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said a week or so ago that the Electoral College was a shadow of slavery's power on America today that undermines our nation as a democratic republic. We already established that we're not a democratic republic, so let's just move on. But the ongoing narrative is that the southern states wanted to keep slavery as an institution and also wanted their slaves to count towards the population, which would give them an overwhelming advantage. It was not that they believed that slaves were worth 3/5 of a person, because the amendment actually reads thus: representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states which may be included within the Union according to their representative numbers, which shall be determined by adding the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. They were talking about the entire population, and it was meant to limit the voting power of states that held slaves. I get the distinct impression that the people who go with the racist interpretation have never actually read the Constitution or the specific clause, which is Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 of the United States Constitution, in case anyone wants to point their liberal friends to it. All right, y'all, we're going to go ahead and take a break. And when we get back, we're going to talk about the massacre that happened in Christchurch, New Zealand, where 50 Muslims were murdered in their mosques. We'll be right back. So we talked about the actual shooting in New Zealand last week. I'm not going to go over that again. It was a tragedy, yes, and I hope that the perpetrator is punished as severely as their law will allow. But today I want to talk about the reaction to it. But before we get into that, I want to get to some breaking news that we have here at the Liberty Cast, because as we're recording, the Attorney General, William Barr, released a summary of Mueller's principal conclusions, and in it, he states that there was no evidence of collusion with Russia. I'm quoting, "The special counsel did not find that the Trump campaign or anyone associated with it conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in these efforts, despite multiple offers from Russian-affiliated individuals to assist the Trump campaign." Boom. But of course, like I said, Shifty and moron Swalwell, they're gonna keep going with it, even though nearly 2 years of an investigation by a guy that, by all accounts before this, was beyond reproach. Now all of a sudden he can't be trusted and his word isn't good enough. And you know why that is? It's another example of leftist projection, because they know they have no principles. They know that if they were in that position, they would be swayed with the wind either way. Whichever conclusion is more politically advantageous for them to come to, that's what they would do. But we'll see how this plays out. Hopefully they'll release the actual report, and then we can actually read exactly what the special counsel found. Now back to our regularly scheduled programming. And we were talking about the reaction to the tragic shooting in New Zealand. So in the wake of the massacre at those two mosques, the New Zealand government has announced massive changes to their gun laws.
Every semi-automatic weapon used in the terrorist attack on Friday will be banned in this country.
That was New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern announcing said massive changes. They have now banned all military-style weapons, quote unquote. And let me read to you how they define that. A semi-automatic firearm that is capable of being used in combination with a detachable magazine, other than one designed to hold a 22 or less rimfire cartridges, that is capable of holding more than 5 cartridges. A semi-automatic firearm that is a shotgun, and that is capable of being used in combination with a detachable magazine that is capable of holding more than 5 cartridges. This is a well-intentioned but knee-jerk emotional reaction to a tragic incident. Now, New Zealand does not have a history of gun violence. It's rare. New Zealand has an annual gun homicide rate that rarely reaches double digits. The most recent mass shooting they had was 20 years ago, when 6 people were murdered and 4 wounded in a town of Rarimu. And I'm sure I mangled that pronunciation, but oh well. But up to this most recent shooting, the deadliest mass shooting in the country was back in 1990. A murder in a town, Aramoana, killed 13 people and injured 3. Now, after that shooting, they amended their gun laws to limit firearms access. But since then, New Zealand has experienced approximately 4 shootings in which more than 5 people were killed. Of course, the left here in this country, they're praising the move, just like they point to Australia's gun confiscation back in 1996, and I'll address that in a second. But New Zealand doesn't have a Second Amendment. Their country does not recognize the individual's natural right to keep and bear arms the way we do.
I want to remind that it is a privilege and not a right to own a firearm in New Zealand.
Second, it could never happen in this country, precisely because we have the Second Amendment. But in the event of some nightmare scenario, they did manage to implement a similar gun confiscation program. There are 100 million plus households with about 350 million firearms, and that number is climbing every day. It's been a while since I've contributed to that number. I need to get on that. But that aside, it would be a dangerous and logistically challenging endeavor for the federal government to try and go door to door to collect all those firearms. But not only that, how effective would it be? If you look at the confiscation in Australia, they instituted that back in 1996 after the Port Arthur shooting. They confiscated and destroyed anywhere between 650,000 and 1 million guns. Now, those guns have been replaced with 1,026,000 new guns. And guess what? Despite the fact that there are now more guns in circulation in Australia, the rate of gun violence has declined in that time. So the confiscation was ineffective and seemingly unnecessary. So when you look at how little gun violence they experience in New Zealand, you have to think that this reaction they're having is also unnecessary and will likely be ineffective. Yet we have people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez talking about how within days New Zealand acted to get weapons of war out of the consumer market, and that's what leadership looks like. Well, she's an idiot, because civilians can't get weapons of war. Although maybe they can in New Zealand, I don't know, I doubt it. But you definitely can't get them here. Brendan Boyle, a rep from Pennsylvania, he tweeted out, "See at GOP? Turns out you can respond with thoughts and prayers and action." So tedious. And then Chris Murphy from Connecticut, he said, "See, it's not that hard," when he was reacting to New Zealand's prime minister announcing the new gun regulations over there. And of course, Bernie Sanders, "We must follow New Zealand's lead, take on the NRA and ban the sale and distribution of assault weapons in the United States." I don't have to say it again, do I? But I mean, this is just par for the course. Anything the anti-constitutionalists can do to advance their gun-grabbing agenda, they're going to do. They're going to use this. Never let a crisis go to waste. They are going to exploit this and do everything they can to advance their anti-freedom, anti-constitutional agenda. But before we get you out of here, let's end on a happier note. Remember a while back, Deerfield, Illinois, they instituted a gun ban. Well, it turns out that on Friday, a Lake County Circuit Court judge ruled that they overstepped their authority when they enacted that ban on assault, quote unquote, assault weapons. I hate that. But anyway, in the ruling, the judge said that gun owners had a clearly ascertainable right to not be subjected to a preempted and unenforceable ordinance. And that ordinance prohibits the possession of the dreaded assault weapons and imposes financial penalties for keeping them and allows for their property to be confiscated. Now, just to refresh your memory, back in April of 2018, the village of Deerfield voted to ban the possession of firearms like AR-15s, AK-47s, and Uzis, claiming that it was to protect public health, safety, morals, and welfare. Anyway, this is just another clear-cut example of the left just running roughshod all over our constitutional rights. Of course, you know they're going to appeal, but I'm just glad that this particular judge had the stones to stand up to the left and say no. One last quick thing before we get you out of here. I know I was going to end on that, but just one last quick thing before we go. Judge Jeanine on Fox, she's been taken off the air, possibly fired, but definitely suspended for the time being, for saying this.
Think about it. Omar wears a hijab, which according to the Quran 33:59 tells women to cover so they won't get molested. Is her adherence to this Islamic doctrine indicative of her adherence to Sharia law, which in itself is antithetical to the United States Constitution?
Of course, that's just a small snippet of her entire 10-minute monologue at the beginning of her show. But I listened to the whole thing, and there was nothing in there, this clip included, which to me warranted a suspension. I mean, Tucker Carlson likes to say that he's happy to be working at Fox because he can say whatever he wants and nothing happens. But why is that extended to him and not Judge Jeanine? I've heard Tucker say some things that some people might find offensive, and yet he's still on the air. So what was it about this that they felt they needed to take her off the air? And it's not even like she made some sort of condemnation. She asked a question. So journalists can't ask questions anymore? Okay, she's an opinion person, granted. So opinion people can't ask questions anymore? Isn't that their job, whether they're journalists or opinion people? That's what I thought. But now because she asked a legitimate question, and Sharia law is in fact antithetical to the United States Constitution. There's no doubt about that. And she's not the first one to say that. And anyone who's read the Quran like I have knows that it's antithetical to the United States Constitution. So what's the problem? I'm at a loss. I think that this is indicative of the leadership of Rupert Murdoch's sons over at Fox. And I think that this is just foreshadowing things to come. I don't think that Judge Jeanine is going to be back on the air. And I think that it won't be long before people like Hannity and Laura Ingraham and Tucker Carlson are all suspended or fired. I think Fox is about to go the way of CNN and MSNBC, thanks to the leftists that are now in charge over there. I hope I'm wrong, but I doubt it. But nevertheless, I stand with Judge Jeanine, and I hope that she is back on the air soon. All right, y'all, that's our show for today. So if you like what you hear, please subscribe, leave a review. You can find us on Spreaker, Spotify, SoundCloud, iTunes, and iHeartRadio. You can also follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. It's at The Liberty Cast on all 3 of those platforms. So I look forward to hearing from you. But until next time, keep your head on a swivel and stay safe, everybody.